It started with whispers in the dark. Every night at exactly 2:13 a.m., the billionaire's mansion would echo with the same haunting sound. Twin children crying in unison. The maid said it was grief. The security guard said it was nightmares. But the truth was stranger. The billionaire, Richard Whitmore, had buried his wife only 6 months ago. She had been the heart of their home, the glue holding his fractured empire together. But after his sudden death in a car accident, the twins, Ethan and Emily, only 6 years old, hadn't slept peacefully a single night. And no matter how many doctors he called, how many therapists he paid, or how much money he threw at the problem, the result was always the same. Two sleepless, terrified children who seemed convinced that something or someone was coming for them in the night. Then one evening, when Richard was at the edge of despair, his personal assistant walked into his study with a file. "Sir, we found someone. She comes highly recommended." Her name was Naomi Daniels, a black woman in her early 30s with no elite credentials, no Ivy League background, and no glittering resume. On paper, she wasn't supposed to fit in this billionaire's world. But what struck Richard wasn't her resume, it was her eyes. Calm, steady, like someone who had seen darkness before, but refused to let it win. Still, Richard hesitated. He didn't want just anyone near his children. Yet when Ethan and Emily met her for the first time, something happened that no one could explain. The twins stopped crying. For the first time in months, they clung to her as though she had always been there. And that very night, when the clock struck 2:13 a.m., the mansion was silent. Everyone thought the nightmare was finally over. They were wrong, because Naomi didn't just comfort the twins. She did something unthinkable in the dark of night, something that would unravel secrets Richard had spent years burying. The staff whispered about it first. The butler swore he saw Naomi walking the children down the hall at midnight, whispering lullabies in a language he didn't understand. The head maid claimed she heard the twins laughing when no one was supposed to be awake. But the strangest part? When morning came, Ethan and Emily were different. Rested, peaceful, stronger somehow. At first, Richard dismissed it as progress. Maybe Naomi was just what they needed, a maternal figure to fill the void. But then little details began to gnaw at him. Why did the twins always insist on sleeping with the lights off now, when before they screamed for night lights? Why did Emily, who hadn't spoken a word since her mother's funeral, suddenly start humming the same lullaby Naomi sang? And why did Ethan begin drawing strange symbols, circles, stars, and dark figures in his sketchbook? One night, Richard couldn't take it anymore. He pretended to be asleep, then quietly followed Naomi as she carried the twins into the library at midnight. What he saw froze him to his core. Naomi had placed the twins in front of the grand fireplace. They were holding hands, eyes closed, as Naomi whispered words Richard didn't recognize. The flames flickered unnaturally. Shadows danced across the room, and for a split second, it looked like another figure was standing behind them in the firelight. Richard's heart pounded. Was this witchcraft? A ritual? He almost burst into the room, demanding an explanation, but something stopped him, because in that moment, Ethan, his son who hadn't smiled in months, laughed. A pure, joyful laugh. And Emily whispered her first word in half a year. "Mommy." Richard stumbled back into the shadows, shaken to his core. Naomi wasn't harming them. She was giving them something he couldn't. But how? And at what cost? The more Richard tried to ignore it, the stranger things became. At breakfast one morning, Ethan casually mentioned, "Mommy said she forgives you." Richard nearly choked on his coffee. "What did you say?" "Mommy," Ethan repeated, spooning cereal into his mouth. "She came last night. Naomi helped us see her." Richard's blood ran cold. His wife forgiving him? For what? Only Naomi knew what the twins were talking about, and when Richard confronted her, she didn't flinch. "Children feel grief in ways adults can't understand," she said softly. "Sometimes they need help remembering love instead of pain. But what exactly are you doing with them at night?" Richard pressed. Naomi met his gaze evenly. "Helping them heal. Isn't that what you pay me for?" Her words should have calmed him, but they didn't, because deep down, Richard knew Naomi wasn't telling him everything. And the real question that haunted him wasn't what she was doing with his children. It was why the twins seemed to trust her more than they trusted him. It all came crashing down one stormy night. Richard was working late in his office when he heard it. The sound of Ethan screaming. He raced upstairs, heart in his throat, only to find the boy curled in a corner of his bedroom, trembling. "She's trying to take Emily." Ethan cried, "Daddy, she's trying to take her." Richard's blood ran cold. "Who?" Ethan's voice was barely a whisper. "Mommy." Before Richard could respond, Emily walked in, her tiny hand clutching Naomi's, and for the first time, Richard noticed it. The exact same wedding band his late wife had worn gleamed on Emily's finger, but it wasn't possible. That ring had been buried with her. Richard's stomach churned. What was Naomi really doing with his children? Where did that ring come from? And why were the twins suddenly convinced their dead mother was still with them? The truth was about to shatter everything Richard thought. He knew Richard locked himself in his study that night, pacing the floor like a trapped animal. His heart was racing, his thoughts tangled. The ring on Emily's finger haunted him. He knew it was impossible. That ring had been sealed in his wife's casket. He pulled out a drawer, fumbled through a stack of papers, and retrieved the small black envelope he had hidden for years. Inside was the insurance settlement from his wife's death. He stared at the amount, astronomical, enough to stabilize his empire, which had been crumbling under secret debt. His chest tightened. She was never supposed to die. It was supposed to be a warning, a scare tactic, nothing more. But the brakes had failed, and her car had spun into the ravine. Now his twins were whispering about her return, and the new nanny had somehow unearthed a ring. Richard's hands trembled as he poured himself a glass of scotch. "What are you really doing, Naomi?" he muttered under his breath, and as if summoned, Naomi appeared at his door. "You shouldn't drink so much," she said calmly, her voice steady but cold. "They need you clear-headed." Richard's throat went dry. "How did you get in here?" Naomi stepped forward, her eyes unwavering. "The real question is, how much longer are you going to lie to yourself about what you did?" The silence between them was suffocating. Richard felt exposed, as though Naomi could see through his carefully constructed walls. "What exactly are you implying?" he snapped, though his voice cracked. Naomi didn't blink. "Your children don't cry at night because they miss their mother. They cry because they feel her pain. Children are more sensitive than we give them credit for. They know when a soul has been wronged." Richard's face paled. What are you saying?" Naomi leaned closer, her voice barely above a whisper. "Your wife didn't die by accident, did she?" Richard's glass shattered on the floor. Naomi straightened, her expression calm but deadly serious. "I was hired because I have a gift. Some call it intuition, others call it spiritual sight. The truth is, your children led me to it. They want answers, and so does your wife." Richard's fists clenched. "Enough of this nonsense you're filling their heads with." "Then explain the ring." Naomi cut him off. Her tone was sharp as a blade. "Explain how Emily has something that was supposed to be buried 6 feet under." Richard's breath caught in his throat. He had no explanation. None. 2 nights later, Naomi did the unthinkable. She gathered Ethan and Emily in the library once more, but this time Richard watched openly. No hiding in shadows, no pretense. Naomi lit 3 white candles, placed a wedding band between them, and instructed the twins to hold hands. "What you're about to see," she said firmly, "isn't magic. It's truth, and truth has power." The flames flickered, the air grew heavy, and Richard felt the hairs on his arms rise. Suddenly, the room was filled with a faint, floral scent, the exact perfume his wife used to wear. And then Emily whispered, her eyes closed, "She's here, Daddy." The flame shot higher. Richard's chest tightened. He saw it, not a full form, but a shadow, a silhouette in the firelight. His wife. Her face was strained, her eyes filled with sorrow, but her lips moved. And Naomi's voice translated. "She says you let them do it. You knew and you said nothing." Richard collapsed into the nearest chair, his heart hammering like a drum. Tears burned his eyes as Richard buried his face in his hands. The children sat quietly, watching, waiting. Naomi's steady gaze forced him to confront what he had buried for so long. She wasn't supposed to die. Richard whispered hoarsely. It was a warning, just a warning. Naomi's expression hardened. You let them tamper with her car? Richard's shoulders shook. I owed them money. Dangerous men. They wanted leverage. I thought if she got scared, she'd convince me to pay. But the brakes failed completely. And I said nothing. I let the world believe it was an accident. Emily whimpered. Ethan clung to her hand. Naomi's voice rose, sharp as steel. And you live with that silence while your children have suffered every night? While they carried her pain in their dreams. Richard's tears spilled freely. What do I do now? He choked. Naomi's tone softened, but her eyes remained piercing. The truth is the only path. You must face what you've done, not for your reputation, not for your wealth, but for them, for your children. The confession shattered everything. The board of Whitmore Enterprises demanded answers when the news leaked, because Naomi made sure it leaked. She handed over Richard's hidden letters, his secret settlements, even the mechanic's testimony he bribed years ago. The world called it scandal. His empire trembled. But in the quiet of his home, something strange happened. The twins finally slept. For the first time since their mother's death, the mansion was silent at 2:13 a.m. No crying, no nightmares, just peace. Richard watched them sleep one night, his heart breaking. Naomi stood at the doorway, her arms folded. They'll heal now, she said softly, because the truth has set them free. Richard looked at her, eyes hollow. And me? Naomi's gaze was steady. That depends on whether you keep running or face the punishment you deserve. Weeks later, Richard Whitmore stood before a courtroom, stripped of his arrogance, stripped of his power. His confession had destroyed his empire, but for once, he didn't care. He turned to see his children sitting with Naomi in the gallery. They looked at him, not with fear, not with anger, but with a quiet kind of acceptance. As the judge read the sentence, Richard bowed his head. He finally understood. Money couldn't protect him. Lies couldn't shield him. Silence had only damned him. But truth, painful, brutal truth, was the only way forward. And for the first time in years, he felt something almost like peace. Naomi walked out of the courtroom holding the twins' hands, their little heads resting against her arms. But as they stepped into the sunlight, Emily tugged on Naomi's sleeve and whispered, "Mommy says thank you." Naomi froze. Slowly, she turned her head. The scent of flowers drifted through the air, soft, fleeting, unmistakable. And Naomi realized some spirits never truly rest until justice is served. If you were inspired, support our channel, comment your thoughts, and subscribe for more interesting and powerful stories.